Okay, whoa. Okay, that's better. What's up guys, Landon here from the Full-Time Filmmaker team, and in this video we're talking about 5 video mistakes and how to fix them in post. But before we jump into it, let me just preface this video by saying that obviously the best thing you can do is just avoid these mistakes by shooting it properly in camera in the first place, because it's always going to give you better and more natural results than if you were to shoot it improperly and then try to fix it later while you're editing. But I also understand that sometimes you just might be in a rush and you need to get a shot, or you're nervous and you forget to change your settings, or maybe you're just a new filmmaker and you don't know how to shoot it properly in the first place. There's also going to be times where you might be forced to fix something in post due to the limitations of your camera. Like maybe it just doesn't perform very well in low light, so you have a lot of noise in your image and you don't have the resources to bring in more artificial lighting. The point is, whether it was an accident or you knew all along, here are my 5 most common video mistakes and how to fix them in post. Okay, so the first is incorrect white balance. So on this clip, we purposely shot it just a little bit too warm for this example. My face is kind of orange. Everything just has like this slight orange hue to it. Now the quickest fix for this, and pretty much every pro editing program can do this, what we're gonna do is just grab this white balance eyedropper tool, and I'm gonna click on a portion of my video that would normally be white. Actually, the only thing here that I know for a fact is white is this little logo on my helmet strap. Bam, and then literally with one click, our white balance is fixed. But what if your white balance is like really off, like it's bad? Like heaven forbid, let's say it looks like this. Now, honestly, this gets a little bit more complicated, but it's not impossible to fix. Now for this, we can try the white balance selector, but I can almost guarantee that it's not gonna work very well. Like it might balance the whites technically, but your skin tones are most likely going to be off and you'll have some color pollution and whatnot. So let's give it a try. Ugh. Yeah, no, that's not gonna work. But good news is that I've simplified this fix down to 4 steps. And again, you can do these things in pretty much any pro editing program. I'm just doing it in Premiere Pro because it's the most common software right now. And also keep in mind, there are so many ways to approach this. So this is not like the end all be all solution. It's just the best method that I've personally found. So just so you're aware, we're gonna be using the scopes to kind of help us figure out where the color balance is sitting. If you look at our waveform right here, this is actually the RGB parade. So we have the red, green, and blue channels, and it's working from left to right on our image. So right here we have some highlights. Right here in the middle is me, the subject, and then on the right we have some more highlights again. And at the bottom of the waveform we have our shadows, in the middle we have our midtones, and at the top we have our highlights. So you don't need to have a detailed understanding of scopes and waveforms just to do this, but a basic knowledge is just gonna help you understand exactly what you're doing here. Okay, so step 1, what we're gonna do is jump over to the curves panel. And what I want to do is just pull down the exposure a little bit. So I'm going to grab this white line up top. I'm going to be bringing down the overall highlights and midtones a bit. We're just going to get that at a comfortable position, and we can change this later. So just bring it down a little bit. Then we're going to jump to our red curve, and I'm going to pull up the red from the middle. I'm looking at my waveform. I'm just trying to balance these midtones right here on the waveform. And then I'm going to jump to the blue curve. I'm just going to pull that down. Looking good. And don't worry about the highlights. Obviously, these channels up top are not sitting level. Don't worry about those right now. Let's just worry about the midtones. Okay, and then I'm just gonna adjust the green a little bit. And again, I'm just looking at the midtones. I just wanna make sure they're sitting a bit closer to each other. So let's toggle that on and off. I mean, that's pretty good. That's only step 1, so that's looking pretty good. All right, now step 2, we're gonna go over and we're gonna create an adjustment layer. And we're just gonna place it right above our clip. And then I'm gonna pump in some warmth in the temperature right here. There we go. And then in the creative tab, I'm also gonna pump in a little bit of vibrance. We're trying to bring back the color from this image since a lot of it was lost because, you know, we shot it very blue, very cold. So we're trying to bring back a lot of that color. And now step 3, we're just gonna jump down to the HSL secondary, and we're gonna select the sky with the eyedropper. Just gonna select it all. You'll have to play with these HSL sliders just to kind of pinpoint only the sky. So this might take a second. There we go. And now I'm just gonna go ahead and lower the saturation. And if you look at my waveform as I'm lowering this, you'll see that those highlight levels are now evening out. So they're sitting at about the same place. All right, and now step 4, what we're gonna do is just make one last adjustment layer. I'm gonna put it over our clips, and then we're gonna jump down to the HSL secondary one more time. And I'm just gonna be selecting the purple part of my helmet because there's kind of just this weird color cast, and you could probably use your RGB curves once again to fine tune it, but the HSL secondary is probably just the quickest way to do it. So I've selected the purple part of my helmet, and then once again, I'm just gonna pull down the saturation. All right, so there is before and after. Not bad, especially considering this was shot on the EOS R in 8-bit at 1080p. So this is not some high-end camera that we're manipulating. This is just a standard mirrorless camera that you might even be using yourself. So even if you did mess up the white balance, you can still bring it back if you need to. Also, if you're lucky enough to have shot your video clip in RAW, like this one from the Blackmagic 6K, you can just go into your RAW settings and fix it with literally one click. So if that's the case, I mean, just disregard everything I went over. Okay, the second mistake is poorly exposed footage. Seriously, if you take away anything from this video, please, please, please let it be this. It's so much easier to bring back detail from your shadows than it is to bring back detail from your highlights. For example, here is a shot of me sitting on my bike with perfect exposure. If we look at our waveform, you can see we have good shadows, midtones, and highlights. All of our levels are sitting in a good place. But now here is the same shot, just slightly overexposed, just about 2 stops, but look at the levels on our waveform. Our shadows are sitting just a little bit higher than they should be. That's an easy fix, but it's the highlights that are in trouble here. We have this flat line here at the top of the waveform, and something you should know about highlights is that if it's just a white blob and you have a flat line on your waveform, most of the time that data is just gone. So unless you shot it in RAW, like this Blackmagic clip, which allows you to change your exposure, there's virtually nothing you can do to fully bring back those highlights without extensive VFX. But there are a few things you can do to make it look just a little bit better. So assuming you can't go back and reshoot it, which I'd recommend, here are the 2 steps that I would take. Now first, we're gonna go ahead and grab our highlights. And we're just gonna pull them down as far as we can get them to go. I'm also gonna grab my whites and pull them down just a bit. The important thing here is just making sure that your whites don't look too gray. And you can check your waveform to kind of see where they're sitting. For this example, I think around 80 is gonna be just fine. And our second step, since we can't fully bring back that lost data in the highlights, the best thing we can do is actually just create a little bit more contrast in the image. So what I'm gonna do is jump over to the contrast sliders, and I'm just gonna pull that up a bit till it's sitting at a pretty good point. You can also use the curves tool if you want. I just think the contrast bar is a little bit easier for the moment. And there we go. I think that's looking a lot better. So here's a before and after. Like I said, you can't bring back those highlights completely, but I do think it looks a lot better. Again, the best solution for this is just prevention, making sure you don't shoot too overexposed in the first place. Now, if this clip was underexposed, like this one right here, I know it looks awful. Our levels are sitting super low right here on the waveform, but we can actually recover this one significantly easier than the overexposed clip. So in 3 steps, here's how I would fix this. Right away, we're just gonna bring up the exposure a bit right here, and then I'll jump over to the curves tab. I'll make a couple points down here so we can just be bringing up those shadows. Right about there. We just want to get it to a pretty good point. And next, I'm going to pump a little bit of saturation into the image. Because it was so dark, we lost a good amount of color data, so we need to enhance what's already there to make up for it. And then the last thing I really need to do is just pump a touch more contrast in there, just so it's not looking too flat. There we go. So here's a before and after. Pretty good. Literal night and day difference. Also a little bonus step too, and I can't do it actually because I don't even have the plugin on this computer, but what you can do is use a denoiser. For example, Red Giant has a really good one, and that would just clear up some of the noise that we see after bringing up those shadows. So if you want to take it a step further, I definitely check that out. All right, on to the third mistake, using the wrong shutter speed. Now this one is slightly subjective because there are rare times when you might want a really fast shutter speed so your footage looks extra crisp and there's no motion blur. For example, in the past, Jake has specifically used a high shutter speed in weddings, so his slow motion just looks extra crispy. There's also times when you might want a slower shutter speed because you're just artsy like that and you like the way it looks. Like right here, we did a 1/15 shutter at 24 frames per second, and you can see there's some weird just aliasing happening. So it gives the illusion of maybe being disoriented and lightheaded. So there are times when you can break the rules of shutter speed, which, by the way, to put it simply, is you want your shutter speed to be double your frame rate. So if I'm shooting at 24 frames per second, my shutter speed should be no slower than 1/48. This will just give you the most natural motion blur in your image. So I'm gonna give you a fix that should cover most cases if your shutter speed is too fast or it's too slow. And first off, let me just address the fact that if you set your shutter speed too slow, there is a point where it becomes pretty much unrecoverable. I ran a few tests just to see exactly where this point is, and I concluded that at 24 frames per second, once you get down to a shutter speed of 1/20, it starts looking really bad, like just way too much motion blur, and it's really, really choppy. But moving up from 1/25 all the way to 1/50, where it should be, it just gets progressively better. Now, let's say you're shooting at 24 frames per second, 1/50, your settings are totally fine, but then you change your frame rate to 60 frames per second because you want to get some slow motion. Now, based on what we've previously talked about, obviously a 1/50 shutter speed at 60 frames per second is far slower than it should be. Ideally, it should be at 1/120. But if we're editing on the 24 frames per second timeline, the footage is actually still usable. It'll only become blurry and choppy if you end up slowing the clip down like this. But if I just keep it at the original speed on a 24 frames per second timeline, it actually works just fine. All right, so now what if your shutter speed is set too fast? So we shot this clip at 24 frames per second with a shutter speed of 1/250, so quite a bit higher than you would generally want it. And if we go ahead and pause it right at the peak of the movement, you'll see we have just a touch of motion blur, but it's a bit too sharp. And if you have a trained eye in filmmaking, you can pretty quickly tell that it's just a little bit off. So the easiest way that I found for fixing this is just bringing that clip into After Effects and then using an effect called time warp. Now, this would normally be used for obviously just adjusting the speed of a clip, but there is a nice feature in here specifically for motion blur, which is what we're going to be using. So I'll go ahead and check enable motion blur. And then on shutter control, I'm going to hit manual. Now, I just want to make sure that the shutter angle is set to 180 degrees. And by the way, this is just another way of looking at shutter speed in degrees rather than a fraction like 1/50. So 180 degrees is the equivalent of having your shutter speed set at the optimal setting, so double your frame rate. So we're gonna keep that there. I'll let that render real quick. And then you'll see we're getting some aliasing happening right here. So to smooth that out, I'm just gonna increase the shutter samples until I think it looks good, right about there. All right, so now here's the before and after on the peak of the movement. Looks good, and if I play it back, looks even better. And guys, just like with any of these fixes, they're not gonna work perfectly on everything. Like if you have a clip that has more movement than my clip, you might have to fine tune these settings quite a bit more. Okay, the fourth common mistake we see is shaky footage. Now, the obvious fix it in post thing to do here would be to run our clip through the built-in stabilizer of our editing program. And if it's a mildly shaky clip like this, we can just apply warp stabilizer. And most of the time, that's all you're gonna have to do. Occasionally though, you will get some weird warping happening inside the image. And in that case, you would just pull the strength down a bit until you're not seeing that anymore. All right, our fifth and final common mistake we see is peaking audio. So right here is a clip of me just talking to the camera. I'll play it for you.
After watching this video, you probably think I'm a professional mountain biker. Truth is, I have an e-bike, and that's like cheating essentially on the trail. So
I mean, the things I'm saying aren't that great, but the audio itself is just bad. And by the way, we just shot this with a shotgun mic on top of the camera, so we do have some traffic and whatnot happening in the background. Not a ton we can do on that side of things, but like I said, we can definitely fix the clipping. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna bring that audio track over to Adobe Audition, and then I'm gonna go up to Effects, and then Diagnostics, and then Declipper. And this is gonna open up in the bottom left. And from here, I'm just gonna select Restore Heavily Clipped on the presets, and then I'll hit Scan. Ooh, and look at that, there are a lot of pieces in this clip that need to be fixed. So I'm just gonna go ahead and hit Repair, and whoa, that's it. That's literally it. Let's play it back.
after watching this video, you probably think I'm a professional mountain biker. After watching this video, you probably think I'm a professional mountain biker.
There you go, guys. I hope you found some value in this video. Like I said at the very beginning, the best thing you can do is just shoot it properly the first time. So if you're a new filmmaker and you're trying to get a grasp of the basics, check out our free online training where we give you our 10 secrets to creating cinematic videos. If you want, you can also just skip the free training and jump right into our online course where we have over 400 awesome tutorials and an active community of more than 15,000 filmmakers for you to interact with and learn from. So links for both of those things will be down below. And by the way, if you liked this video, please hit the like button. It actually helps YouTube know that you enjoyed it, and they'll push it out to more aspiring filmmakers who might really need to see this. Again, thanks so much for watching, and as always, if you have any further questions, please let us know.